I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Good evening, and welcome to Single Shot Show at Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Roundtable. Tonight we will be talking in detail about a subject we touched several times before, about film revival in modern photography. A few years ago, a lot of us thought that that's it. Film will be dead in a few years, but to surprise of many and to pleasure of those who believe in film and cherish it to this day, it didn't happen, and on contrary, there are more and more people who either return into film or starting from scratch. And in order to look into this, we invited an educator, a brilliant photographer, and extraordinary with developing film, who, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, created some of his own processes, Barron Rachman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barron. It's really a pleasure to have you. Your work is really astonishing, and this, as I understand, new series, chemical prints.
Chemical paintings.
Chemical
Yes.
paintings, even back. Yeah, is actually extraordinary. So
thank you very much.
Let's look into this and see why film is actually reviving despite all the comforts and ease of use of digital photography.
Well, as far as with the chemical paintings, well, the chemical paintings, I started working on them in about 2006, 2007. Yeah. And digital had been around, of course, but I was still steeped in analog photography. I didn't have formal training, meaning I didn't go to art school for photography. I kind of learnt by working for people. So I had a very classical training I did apprenticeships, and then I ended up working for a man called Chuck Kelton, who ran Kelton Labs in New York City, and it was it's probably one of the top 2-3 labs in the world. And I worked for him on and off for about 20 years. And so my training there was very, very intense and very classical, purely in black and white photography, from processing film to printing portfolios and museum shows, all under Chuck's supervision, or I would work with him.
Wow, exactly. Go on.
So so it was a very rigid training. All the photographers we worked for were photographers who were steeped in representation. You know, classic black and white photographers. People like Danny Lyon, Mary Ellen Mark, and then commercial artists like Stephen Meisel, all the fashion people. Yeah. So it was very exacting work. And in those years, I also was introduced to people's work like Les Krims, Boris Mikhailov, all the Joel Peter Witkin, Sigmar Polke, who's a painter, but he also did photography. Absolutely. And I saw stuff that I was like, oh my God, this is still photography. And it was all very alternative, very surreal, very abstract, all in their different ways. And I was very attracted by it. And I at that point, I still didn't think I had permission when I discovered these people to do this with my own work, you know. But come around 2006, 2007, I started feeling comfortable enough to do this and with my own work. Because before that, my own work was all about street photography or photojournalism and so forth.
Yes, I actually noticed that it was quite a sharp change. You started photographically more as a reporter, I would say.
Yeah, well, as a street photographer. I started taking pictures when I was like 17, 16. And then I transitioned to photojournalism to try to figure out how to make a living. Even those years when I was working for Chuck, I would go away and do my own assignments and so forth. But yeah, no, you're right. And then, you know, I stopped I stopped being a photojournalist about 2000, 2001. And then when I came back to New York, I was working for Chuck again. And from 2001 to 2006, I started, I've always also liked outsider art. And outsider photographers and painters, or some of these outsider artists incorporated imagery into their paintings. So even though I have no formal training in drawing or painting, or I've always kind of loved to draw and paint, but I really wanted to start figuring out how to do it in the darkroom. And I noticed that when I would use chemistry incorrectly, because I didn't run the print properly, staining would happen.
Yes.
And that's when I was like, wow, this staining is interesting. Let me learn more about this. And so I really basically started studying a variety of ways on how to make stains and different types of marks on photographic paper.
So basically your approach started with some errors that was happening in the studio.
Exactly.
It's actually happening quite often with the best approaches to art. Something is made by mistake or by accident, and then it becomes sometimes even the whole premise of the body of the artistic work.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a great the happy accident, you know. And so I started. It was. I used to see them as accidents, and then I started seeing it as, this is interesting. And so I kept from, I really started working on it heavily around 2006, between 2006 and 2008.
So as of now, it's still have this part of uncertainty. I mean, I know everything that is done in Lightroom does have part of uncertainty naturally. The chemicals could be mixed wrong. There could be an error in composing chemicals on the factory. All of this can go wrong.
Yeah.
There is always a moment of uncertainty, but as general premise, is it controlled process now, or it's still more of a freehand, let's see what happened process?
No, it's a controlled process at this point. If you look at the work, you'll see that there's a consistency of colors that come up. There's a consistency of patterns. There's things that I can repeat. Do I have 100% control? No.
Absolutely not.
But the control I have, I know how to control it very well. And so at some point, that, even though it's technically not 100% control, it does, there is, it almost is philosophically in some way, because I can control a majority of things, not completely. So, you know, I have for about a year and a half, all I did was take notes and try different dilutions, try different things, try different brushes, try different papers. And I noted the results that I liked, and then I would try to repeat them, and I was able to repeat them.
Oh, that's actually fascinating. I can only imagine how much of work you described now in a few simple phrases.
Yeah, no, it was painstaking. It was painstaking, but I was obsessed with it. So I really, the more I dove into it, the more overwhelmed I got, but the more curious I got.
Yeah,
so
that's probably one of the biggest differences between film process and digital process, at least by the way it's meant to be. Film process requires way more patience after the shot is taken. And on the other hand, it provides you more opportunity to actually meditate and reflect on your work in this process.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's I think that's part of why I like that process. You know, there's a certain. I mean, it's funny because I of course I teach digital and so forth, as well as analog, but one thing that drives me crazy with my digital students is that sometimes we'll be out shooting, or I'll see them shooting. They take a shot and immediately they look at the screen. And the situation is still happening, you know. I'm like, stop! You're missing things. You don't know what's happening.
Well, guilty as charged. And if I may suggest something, you can just tell them to have the preview to be showing a little longer. Because instead of there is on most of the cameras you can choose the length of the preview showing.
Oh, so it won't come up so fast.
If they tend to look at it, they will actually most of the time wouldn't have enough of the preview, and they would try to press this button that displays it for longer. So if they have a longer preview, they would be able to glance at it and get back to shooting.
Okay.
You can't stop people from doing it if that's what they was doing from the beginning.
No, it's a habit.
It is completely different process, and I'm actually exactly a person to discuss it with, because this is my process, that's what I do. And you know what we say in digital photography, how to tell film photographer from digital. Ask him if he can walk into his Lightroom. Yeah, so I cannot walk into my Lightroom, even though I can spend there quite a long time editing photos, but again, it's not how this process meant to be, and it's actually very curious to see that your process actually makes you to work more elaborately and longer on your shots after the shot is taken, while the whole tendency of what's happening with film photography right now promoting the opposite thing. As much as it from out of the camera, untouched, unedited, as big as the value of the actual shot.
Right.
And we will actually get back to this after this break.
Okay.
Today in Single Shot, I'm going to tell you how to make a makeshift pinhole camera. It's actually very simple. All you need is a business card. I'm gonna use mine, but you can use any. You need to apply 2 pieces of duct tape on it, just like this, so they will be overlapping each other. And right in the middle of the cut, from the inside, pierce a small hole. The smaller and rounder it is, the better will be your result. And put this contraption right on the camera, so the hole is right in the middle of the lens space. Then point it at what you would like to take a picture of, put the camera on delay, and take the shot. Voila! You have your pinhole camera shot. Thank you, and watch us on YouTube. Okay, we're back, and actually during the break we had some very interesting thought that a lot of surreal photography that is being done digitally now is actually taking longer to produce, pretty much mimicking what Barron does.
Right.
And but it's not what digital was meant to be. It actually originally was meant to be quicker and easier.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think there is something to slowing down. I mean, I even used to like that in the analog world. We all used to slow down when we went from 35 millimeter to all of a sudden a field camera, 4x5 camera. Mm-hmm. You had to slow down. Or even a Rolleiflex 120 camera, a Rolleiflex,
wow.
Which was great. It was so I welcome any of those opportunities I can to that the materials make me slow down because
the whole nature of film photography is based on maximum of 36 exposures, if you like it. Some cameras have only 12 maximum.
Right.
Yeah, so it definitely makes you to think and focus on what you do.
No, it's true. It's true, absolutely.
Well, most of digital photographers actually tend, the younger as a photographer they are, to click as much as possible and be as trigger happy as they can, but a lot of people actually slow down, probably not to the speed of film photography. I mean, limiting yourself to 36 exposures, unless you do it specifically as some kind of self-inflicted assignment.
Right.
It's probably impossible, but limiting yourself to 100 is possible. I can do it that.
Yeah, no, and in the digital realm, 100 is
nothing.
Nothing. It's
now they
less than
count it in
36 in
thousands.
film. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting how the process is being reversed and being interchanged, and it's really interesting where it will go. But let's get a little bit to your process and see what you would be willing to share with us.
For the chemical paintings.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, basically, like I said, it's a staining process, and I use a combination. It's still, what excites me about them, they're still very much traditional photography, because it's photographic paper, chemistry, and light exposure, right? And
That's
so, and these, some of the pieces I have, and I don't know if they're on the website, I'm not even using my negatives, but on many of them I'm using my negatives as well. You know, I'm exposing them onto the paper. Oh, nice. So, you know, it's a combination of using fix incorrectly, using stop incorrectly, using them at crazy, either very intense dilutions, right, or super diluted. So, and when I do this, I just have beakers and beakers of different chemicals at different dilutions.
Every time you say it incorrectly, I'm actually shuddering. Maybe we should use something else alternatively?
Alternatively or non-traditionally?
Because results definitely don't say incorrectly to me. And results is in the end what matters, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, and when you hear me say that, it just shows how steeped I was and how trained I was. You know what I mean? I
totally understand that.
So, and going back to that, it took me about 5 years to feel okay, like this is what I can do, you know? And I remember when I did it, a lot of my colleagues were like, what are you doing? This is crazy. You can't do this, you know? But once they were over the initial shock of it, they actually really were excited about the work I was doing. Yeah. But that's how steeped I was in my formal training, so.
Well, actually, it reminds me of another story we had in one of the previous episodes when we was talking with Richard Horowitz about his work, and he was trying to implement digital photography in his art for the first time. And all his friends was telling him, what are you doing? It will never work. So I guess that's the fate of any innovation, both in analog and digital world. And the reason why it sounds so alternative for me when you say it incorrectly, because in my understanding that's exactly the way photography will be going to in the probably next years or decades. We was too much focused on doing everything correctly. We was too much focused on portraying world realistically. We reached the level of 19th century paintings realism in approach and accuracy.
Right.
And now everybody have an iPhone for that, pretty much.
Right. Yeah. No, it's there's nothing to it anymore. And no, I think it's time for photography to really be able to do this more and more, because photography has so many possibilities other than what it's so good at or what it's so well known to do, which is to represent the world as we think we see it, you know, but that's what it does.
Well,
right.
This realistic photography also represents the world. It just doesn't represent the physical form of this world, but what an artist actually means to see in this world. And that's what ultimately visual art is about for good 200 years now.
Right.
And apparently only our media was deprived of this right. So now those doors of opening, I really hope it's doors of hell, paradise, not of hell. We'll see. But talking about your chemical paintings, there is another aspect we didn't touch, and apparently it's the most important one, the actual narrative of the work. The process is truly fascinating, and the results are visually extremely pleasant and aesthetically flawless. But in the end of the day, any visual piece is still about what artist is trying to say. And as I understand, it's not just random imagery, it's very specific messages you're trying to portray, very specific, if not thoughts, but emotions, at least, you're trying to display. So would you mind to tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I kind of what I like to, I mean, you know, part of the reason why I went into journalism is the power of an image. I think it speaks, everything they say speaks 1,000 words, etc. It really is a very powerful vocabulary. So I always believed in the power of straight photography. But what I liked about this, working in this way with the chemical paintings, it allowed me to be more emotive. It allowed me to include mark making, which I found interesting in, like, for example, abstract expressionism. The mark making, I think, was something that was so innovative in painting.
Indeed.
And so, but I didn't want it just to be about mark making. I have always loved collaging. So using my images were very, very important to me. And it was like I used images that I also, you know, printed straight. And to me, they still share a narrative. They're different images, but they share a narrative to me because I think the mark making allowed me to push more emotionally what I was trying to say with the straight picture.
Oh, that's the actual nature of photo composite and the magic it creates. It actually creates a third narrative out of two completely unrelated, sometimes narratives just put together.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's what I believe your work is actually doing, and doing extremely well.
Thank you.
But let's say chronologically, what comes first? The aesthetical part of it, or the actual story you're trying to put in? Basically, first you think what story you're trying to say with the images, and then combine those images, and then trying to see how to arrange them in one piece, or first the idea of the piece comes and then the narrative edited?
It's interesting. I usually, whenever I go in and I think, okay, I know what negatives I'm going to use, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to apply these chemicals, these type of marks, I'm going to go for this. A lot of times when I go in with that idea, it doesn't work. So it's interesting. It seems like the images that I end up working with is while I'm in the studio making them. I'll switch images around. It's never a linear process.
Okay, so I guess we'll talk about this uncertainty after the break.
Welcome to Single Trick by Single Shot. It's a beautiful weather here in New York, perfect for outdoors photography. However, when you photograph in a lighting like this, there is always one problem. Objects on the ground, like myself right now, are much darker than a sky. Most of you would say HDR is a solution. Yes, it is. However, there is a simpler, very old trick, the gradient filters. It's a completely analog way to make your sky to be even in amount of light with your lamp. Even simple gray one will give you a lot, but besides that, you can use a blue one and make the sky to actually have more blue color in it. You can use sepia and make a day to look closer to the sunset lighting, and even something as crazy as bright mauve color. The trick is to have gradient right in the middle of the lens.
Have so much to talk and just few minutes left, and we was talking about uncertainty when it comes to creating narrative for the composites. So you were saying that when you have a preset idea, usually it doesn't work.
Yes, that's what I'll go into the studio and I'll be like, okay, I've thought about all week what I'm going to do. And I see, the more I work in this way, the longer I realize that it has to happen while I'm in the dark room. And that's when I'm like seeing that the images aren't working. Maybe the mark making techniques are working, but the images I chose aren't working. So I'll switch out, and I have all my negatives there. So sometimes I just randomly pick negatives and just throw them, throw them in and say, and sometimes those work. So and that's the other thing I like about this process. It allows me to have more studio time and work more like a painter, I guess, which is nice.
That's why it's visual art, actually. If it was possible to just verbalize everything, why would the world need visual artists of any sort?
Good point.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's actually indeed a fascinating process. There was one thing I wanted to at least mention. Besides this series, you have a pretty extensive collection of works created using Polaroid.
Yes.
And it's one peculiar thing. We probably will need another episode to talk about this specific media, but I just wanted to mention that particular one in connection with this process being a transition from film to digital in terms of instant gratification, which is a plague and advantage of digital photography, if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because we talked before, you were talking about the Concorde series.
Yes, that was one of the most fascinating ones.
Yeah, I mean, the Concorde series, actually the chemical paintings influenced the Concorde series a little bit.
In what way?
Well, I remember, because I was shooting old Polaroid still, like the original old Polaroid 600 film, and I noticed some batches, there'd be something wrong with the emulsion. And I liked that. And I said, okay, let me see, can I figure out ways to how to mess with the emulsion while I'm taking it, not in the post only. And so I would play with the pods that hold the chemicals. I would play with the tension of the rollers in my camera. And I was wanting to photograph the Concorde, especially because it was something in my family when we photographed growing up. It was during the Polaroid era, and it was always to cherish a memory. But we wanted it instantly, so I wanted to do the same with the Polaroids.
Well, as I said, we really would need another episode to cover this. Thank you very much, Barron, and it's really great that artists like yourself actually playing with photography and creating such an amazing things. Good luck, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.